What's up, Internet? It's me, Jake Coburn, and you are listening to another episode of the Quarantine Sessions podcast. I began to record episodes for this podcast at the beginning of the year 2020 during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the inspiration behind these podcasts was to provide a platform for the pillars and leaders of my community to share their voice and to help construct an inspiring narrative for people in this time of crisis, when a need for the upliftment of the spirit has been at its most urgent. This podcast centers around themes of art, creativity, spirituality, and psychedelics. And the incredible people I've had conversations with are all people who have bravely stepped outside of the conventional way of thinking and the conventional way of being and have transcended the matrix of the default reality, living life on their own terms. They are all people I respect deeply, and it has been an amazing opportunity and a privilege to speak to and learn from them. Most of these podcasts have been recorded live through Instagram, which is a new and somewhat experimental medium to conduct podcasts. I truly hope you enjoy this podcast and continue to tune in for future episodes. It's really a labor of love on my part, and thank you so much again for listening. Without further ado, here's the show. This episode is with Chris Orozco, aka Operation Moksha. Chris is a transformational life coach who focuses on shadow integration work. We spoke about the shadow, about what it means, and what to do with it. It was an interesting conversation, and I hope that you enjoy listening to this podcast. Don't be afraid to dive into your depths and to face your inner demons. Enjoy.
Yo, what's up?
What's up, dude?
How you
Good
doing?
to see you. Good, man. Really good. How you doing?
Good. You got more studs than I think you had last time.
Yep, it's growing every day. This is my new quarantine hobby that I'm just really getting into.
Is it like every time you overcome a fear, you put a little, like an extra?
Kind of. It actually is kind of like that. Because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and it's like I get this wrong every time I try to do it. So I have to like face fears every time I do it. So it's like actual like monument to me overcoming my fear of perfectionism.
Cool. So yeah. The creation of the garment itself is an act of shadow integration.
It is, and it's got like I'm very picky about the symbolism that I pick on it, because I need to make sure that I'm like aligned with the message that I'm sending every time somebody looks at me. So it's actually kind of borderline mandala-esque kind of practice.
Cool. Yeah. You ever read Dharma Punks?
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, I read Dharma.
Noah Levine and stuff. Yeah, I read that book when I was like in high school, I think.
Yeah.
Back when I was like big into black metal and stuff like that, and it really resonated as somebody who kind of like took that path from shadow into light. That's man. A great book about shadow integration, really, actually, is what that book is about.
Yeah, man. And it's such a good book. I read like a lot of his books. I even went to one of his meditation things here in LA.
Oh, yeah. He's in LA, right?
He's got a place in LA, and I think he also has a place in New York.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and it's pretty rad. It's mostly like recovery based. It's for like people in recovery, so it's a lot of that. It's pretty heavy, but it's also just really cool to just be in a sangha full of like punks and people that just want to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, that sounds like fun. Do you have any specific bands that you're representing on your jacket?
So this is the main thing. I made this jacket with this in mind.
Cool.
Which is kind of like, I actually got that shirt at a that t-shirt store on the corner of Haight and Ashbury?
Which one?
There's like literally right across the street from the ice cream shop. It's literally on the corner of Haight and Ashbury. There's like that t-shirt shop right there.
On Haight?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
I got it there before, I got the shirt before the Love Parade, 10 years ago or something like that. And then when the whole division of the country got crazier and crazier, I decided to sew it on the back of my jacket as like a sign of like unity and coming together, and that America can be peaceful.
Nice. Yeah, I used to rock all the band patches, but it's more like, it's more showing your credibility for knowing of really obscure bands, you know? Like you get the patches of like the most obscure, but like pretentiously, you know.
Which is why I generally don't put bands on my stuff. Actually, you know, it's funny you talk about Dharma punks. I actually have one of their patches on my pants. Let's see if I can show it to you. There it is.
Cool. That's dope. Yeah, wow. Look at that. I just knew it. I knew it just by looking at you.
Yeah, I forgot I was wearing one on me. But yeah, I try not to put bands on my stuff because I don't want to be a walking billboard. I want to be covered in symbolism.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's like my no band tattoo rule, you know, for the same reason.
Oh, do you have one of those rules?
Yeah, I would never get a band tattoo. You know, it's just not the person I'm aligned with for how I want to adorn my body.
I feel pretty similar.
Do you want to introduce yourself to people, seeing as more people are kind of joining on now?
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Chris Orozco. I teach shadow integration. I've been doing it for like, I think 10 years now, just about. I've at least been studying, if not teaching, and it's completely changed my life. I teach it specifically because it saved my life. Actually, right before I met you was one of the hardest times of my entire life. I was basically convinced I had to kill myself to protect myself from what I thought I was becoming. I had a lot of repressed rage, and it was making my thoughts turn really hostile and like even like homicidal, and it was scaring the crap out of me. And so I legitimately thought I had to end my life to protect everyone from around me. And that's like right in my moment of need is when I discovered shadow integration. And so it was this really beautiful realization that my friend told me. I was living with 3 witches at the time. And one of them was like, dude, you're not broken. You're just taking really poor care of yourself. If you take better care of yourself, you'll get healthier. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? And so she gave me this book, and I read it, and introduced me to the concept of parts work. What was the book? And it's called Embracing Ourselves. It's by Hal and Sidra Stone. It's a pretty good map. It's a pretty good map. Main concepts being you're not just one thing, you're a collection of different sub-personalities is what they call them. And your sub-personalities have varying degrees of needs, fears, desires, all that sort of stuff. And if you connect with them and get to know them and like nourish them on a personal level, even the most unhealthy elements of your psyche will become healthy. And for some reason, I just believed that when it was presented to me. And so I dove in with everything that I had. And and it worked, and my life consistently started getting better and better and better. And so one day, 2 years after I started the practice, I realized that my life was good, and I was like, holy fuck, I have to teach people how I did this. Like, I don't want to die anymore. And so that's what I've been doing for like the last 10 years. Yeah,
wow. Yeah, when I met you, you were working for Android Jones, who is like in himself kind of like a shadow integrationist.
Yeah,
you know, for sure.
Totally. He's like doing the alchemy for all of us on a giant collective level. So that was really fucking cool. That was a really cool experience to be able to like meet you in that experience, which I had no qualifications to be in. I had no reason to be there.
I mean, you have the willingness to help. That's the only qualification you need.
I literally got that because I was yeah, I mean, I was camped at Fractal Planet, and then I only got that job because I like walked up to Android afterwards, and I was like, hey, dude, really good to meet you. I like working with you. And he was like, cool, come to Portugal. And then I worked with him for like 5 years after.
That's how it happened. I mean, I know this guy who like crowd surfed onto the stage at a Bass Nectar concert and then became Bass Nectar's like tour manager after that. So like things happen all the time because so few people are even willing to make that original approach, you know, like so many people would just be afraid to go up and talk to him and to say what you said, you know? So,
yeah, 100%. And that's, it's really ridiculous how easy that kind of is, because I've also got other opportunities that I wasn't qualified for just because I asked for them. And there's like a lot in that, where literally you just have to ask, and people are way more willing to give you things than I think a lot of us are willing to entertain.
Well, I think it comes out of the fear of rejection, which is one of the most ingrained things. And people explain it by saying that when we were in tribal communities, if you were rejected, that would have major implications. Because if you got rejected by the wrong person, then you could be completely cast out of the whole tribe, and then you would be left for dead, basically, to have to fend for yourself alone in the wild. So we still have that. We're still tribal and we're still social, you know, and those risks are, you know, less of a risk now because our communities are much larger. But I think that there's still a fear of those social implications, and that's why so many people are afraid of asking for what they want or for approaching certain people. I mean, I've had that stuff come up myself and my career and my ambitions, you know.
Yeah, man. And it's a particularly difficult fear because it's not only could potentially lead to your death, but that's a really shitty way to die. Like, to be cast out and you're on your own and you don't know how to fend for yourself, and God knows what animals are out there, and it's not like if you get cast out you die quickly, you know. It probably takes days, maybe even weeks. And so it's that's stuck in there in the amygdala of like, okay, of all the ways to die, please don't make it that one. Yeah. And so so like that fear is really real, man.
Yeah. What have you done, and what do you do with people that you're working with to help them overcome those kinds of fears? If you notice that there's a particular ambition that somebody has and they're being directly limited to pursuing that ambition based on their fears, what would you say to those people? What strategies would you suggest?
Yeah, it's always pinpoint the specific thing you don't want to feel. Every single fear, every single piece of avoidant behavior, no matter what you're doing, it's all designed to avoid one specific emotion. So if you can pinpoint the one thing that rejection will make you feel that you really don't want to feel, and find a way to voluntarily embrace that feeling, you will run out of things to be afraid of.
It's usually shame, right? Would you say that's the most one?
It definitely is. It was a really big one for me. It seems like most people I talk to have to deal with a decent amount of shame. I think that's largely cultural. But yeah, it's like if you can get comfortable with shame, then it's like, what the fuck is this world going to throw you? It's going to slow you down like nothing. That's one of the most common fears.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think the term growing comfortable is really important to emphasize, because I think in these situations, people talk about overcoming fear, and then that means that you don't encounter fear within yourself anymore, but that's not actually how it works. The overcoming of fear is growing in deeper acquaintance with it so that it doesn't limit you so much, so you're not averse to feeling it, but when it arises you can just kind of sit with it, or not being so directed or limited by it.
Yeah, 100%. And
you get like all the negative emotions, well, quote unquote negative emotions, but the dense emotions like shame or anger or whatever it is, a lot of people don't want to put themselves in circumstances that might provoke those emotions because they just don't want to feel that. But if you can kind of lean into the discomfort and become comfortable within that, then that frees you up so significantly.
Yeah, and the mantra I always tell myself, like, this is just an experience. Like, experiences are pleasant, some experiences are unpleasant. That's just how it is. And like any uncomfortable emotion is an experience. And the interesting thing that I notice about it is when you have a context around feeling these uncomfortable emotions, they become pleasurable. Like when you understand, it's like when you understand that what you're doing is a good thing for you and that you're loving this part of yourself, then suddenly it's like, okay, like, yeah, this is kind of shitty, but it's pleasurable. Like it's actually creating pleasurable sensations in my body, whereas if I resisted it, they would have been extremely painful. And that's, I think, one of the most important things people can learn about shadow integration, is that it doesn't have to hurt. The more you welcome it, the more you accept it, it actually becomes kind of an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, totally. I did a event here that was called Shadow Dance, and it was like it was I guess an ecstatic dance. It was a dance, you know, you can call it ecstatic dance if you want, but it was all like darker spectrum music. The lights were off, you know, like I created a visual sequence that was a little bit more on the eerie side, like all like dark, like black and gray animation and stuff like that. And yeah, it's like I really get down with that. Like I really love to dance to like heavier, like darker music. That really gets me going. But what was funny about it is how many people just take that kind of the name at its face value and showed up to the event and were like, there was a guy that was like screaming on the dance floor, you know, and like other people just like making all these noises, like moaning and groaning and like, and I'm kind of just like, okay, like that's not how I feel when I get to like heavy bass music. Like I feel like pumped up, like fuck yeah, like. Yep. But I think that it's an implication if you tell somebody, oh yeah, this is like shadow work, that comes with a degree of like pain and discomfort, but it's not necessarily the case, because the transmutation of those shadow type energies into a lighter form of energy can be incredibly cathartic and pleasurable. You know, like I used to go to a lot of metal concerts when I was younger, and man, I would come out of these concerts feeling so good. It was like it took a whole huge weight off of me. Like I would let go of so much in the container of that event. It was like a shamanic rite, you know, and everybody was going through that collectively, but I wouldn't come out of it feeling more contracted and more pissed off and more angsty. It was the opposite. It really helped me release that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, you know, because like I still listen to punk rock, and so sometimes I'm sitting there thinking, like, why do I enjoy, like when I sit there and I listen to music, why is my go-to to have somebody fucking scream at me? Like, why is that the sensation that I enjoy? And to me, it's just like it validates something that's core to a lot of us. It's like a lot of us have anger. A lot of us, I mean, everybody has anger, and it's just like, are you comfortable feeling that, and are you comfortable letting that flow through you? And the thing that I particularly love about punk rock, I don't know a whole lot about metal, but the thing that I love about punk rock, or at least certain elements, certain subgenres of punk rock, is it's always about directing that anger. It's like, okay, cool, you're angry, the world's fucked, what are you going to do about it? Like, it's on your job to fix it. Yeah. And so that's been one of the biggest motivating things for me, is just like, yeah, you're angry, and then like direct it something and do something with it.
I think
plus it's just nice to hear somebody scream your thoughts to you.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think metal kind of takes a more mythological approach generally, that kind of abstract the emotions, and then usually it's not like political, you know. It usually kind of goes into these more, a lot of songs about Satan, you know what I mean? Like it takes a more kind of like archetypal mythological bent to expressing those emotions, and it's more of an aesthetic thing, I guess. But yeah, I appreciate that as well. I think that there's something, I mean, like anger, there's a ton of energy within anger, you know. It's powerful. So you can potentially find a way to channel that anger and to utilize it in a way that is very constructive. But that's like learning to fire dance or something like that. It's like learning to spin fire. You know, it takes a lot to be able to learn to maneuver that, and it's an art form, I think.
Yeah, it really is. It's like a mix between like water bending and wizardry is what I notice when I'm like getting really like into it. And that's one of the keys of like integration, right? Because I draw this distinction between shadow work and shadow integration. And if you're not leveraging this stuff, whatever you're feeling, whatever the emotion is, if you're not leveraging it to be in service of something, then it's not really integrated. Like you can be feeling it, and I think I kind of like made that, because it's like shadow is becoming more popular now. People are talking about it. And so people are doing shadow work, and like people are talking about shadow integration, and there's all these different shadow integration frameworks coming out. But I look at them and I study them, and a lot of them are missing the actual integration phase. And so it's like, yeah, you can't really call that shadow integration. You can call that shadow work because you're acknowledging your shadow and you're feeling these feelings that you'd rather not look at. But without the intellectual piece of understanding what it's attempting to accomplish and nurturing that to accomplish it in the healthiest, best way possible, then you haven't really integrated it. It's just kind of like sitting off in the corner, and like maybe it's doing stuff, maybe it's not. You're comfortable with it, and it's not causing immense suffering, but you haven't fully integrated it into your system, so you're not really it's not making your life any better.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some examples of that from you to get more specific about that. But I think what you're saying is that emotions are these communication networks, and they're telling us something, and our emotions exist for a reason, you know, and they do serve us. Nothing that is going on in our minds and bodies is there to hurt us. It's actually there to try to help us, you know, and it's why for success and survival and reproduction and all this stuff and everything is kind of trying to orient towards our increased survival. So I think was that what you were kind of saying, that to understand why the emotions arise and to be able to empathize with them and see kind of what their purpose was for you in order to integrate it?
Yeah, and I think a really good example is I was going to give a talk at Lucidity in Santa Barbara 2 years ago, and I was practicing my talk. And I was talking about life purpose, which I've been talking about for like 9 fucking years. But for some reason, like, I had this voice in my head being like, "You're the worst speaker ever. They should have never hired you. You're going to totally screw this. Like, you're just the worst." And I was like, "That's weird. I'm very comfortable with this topic. I wonder why this is happening." And so I actually listened to it. Instead of just being present with it, I was like, "All right, why are you telling me this?" And I got 3 distinct messages, and it was, 1, you're not speaking from the heart. You're just parroting your own YouTube videos. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, shit, you're right. I am doing it." So I started speaking from the heart, and I felt better. And the next one was like, you don't actually have an intention for what you want to accomplish with this talk. And I was like, oh shit, that's also a good point. So then I got clear on my intention. And then the very last one was, you're not speaking with the audience in mind. And I was like, also a good point. And so once I did those things, not only did the voice it wasn't there anymore, it turned into excitement. And that's what I mean by integration. Like, I could have just been present with the fact that some part of me is like, you're the worst. You're the fucking worst speaker ever. But instead to listen to it and to honor it and be like, you must be helping me in some way because you're a part of me. It doesn't make sense that any part of me would be inherently self-destructive. That just doesn't make sense with anything. Like, I don't get any parallel to that. And so it's like, okay, so you must be trying to help. So you're just helping in an ass-backwards way. And this is when you have to learn how to speak the language of the unconscious. Here's what you're actually saying. Let me look underneath that and see if I can pull some context as to why you might be saying that and what other thing you might be trying to accomplish. So it's like, you're terrible. It's like, why would I benefit from telling myself that I'm terrible? Like, oh, so I don't embarrass myself. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's protecting you ultimately.
Exactly.
Right?
And so it's like, what am I worried about being embarrassed of? It's like, oh, this thing. And then as soon as you take responsibility for that and you act in alignment with whatever this thing's telling you, it's like, cool, thank you. You listened to me. I like you now. Now you're free to go do whatever you need to do. And then your fear and anxiety and all that stuff turns into excitement. And so, like, that's the distinction for me between shadow work, which is being present with your stuff, and shadow integration, where you're actually listening to it and understanding it and value you.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. I mean, that's something I've really experienced too in my own process is, especially through, I guess, meditation practice and seeing the way these narratives play out in my mind. But something I'll do is that I'll have a thought, something like, you're a loser or something like that. And my first reaction to that is to try to overcome that thought by presenting evidence that's like the opposite and kind of like battle it in my mind until eventually those kind of more positive thinking loops take hold. But I find that that doesn't actually release the hold of the original thought. It doesn't release its charge. So at a certain point, I made a shift to, instead of trying to basically battle the thoughts with other thoughts, you know, and try to convince myself that whatever my shadow was telling me wasn't true, to instead just really be with it and just kind of like allow that thought to play out. And it's kind of like having like a freak out hall pass, you know, like it's like, let yourself freak out, like let yourself be a mess, like let yourself feel the feelings and go to those places that you might be afraid to go to. Usually when you do that, you let those thoughts come, you let the emotions that accompany them come up, and you really are just objective and present with it. And usually it just kind of does its thing and then it's gone.
Yeah. You know? And I like that you said objective, because Like my frame for that is just not arguing with reality. Mm-hmm. It's like, I don't want to feel these feelings. It's like, well, they're already there. Like all shadow integration is just being honest about what you already think and already feel. You don't have to do anything new. You just need to stop suppressing what already exists. And that's most of the work right there. If you can do that, then you're good.
Right. I guess that what I was doing before in a way was like suppressing it.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And then, I was actually influenced by Buddhist teachings and stuff, because mm-hmm. that's one of the main principles of Buddhism, is just to be with things as they are and mm-hmm. nothing more, not even needing to elaborate them in your mind. Because something that I find that I do a lot is when I'm in a really happy, pumped up, stoked, emotional place, there's a story that gets attached to that. Mm-hmm. So, and that story intensifies those emotions, you know. So, and usually those stories in my mind are some kind of future projection that aren't even necessarily real. So I'm all mm-hmm. excited about this thing that I'm projecting onto the future happening, you know, and I get really pumped up. Well, when the opposite happens and I get into a really sort of low emotional place, the stories also come. And mm-hmm. I find that it was a liberating realization to understand that for both the positive, the exalted, and the diminished emotional state, the stories that accompany them are equally false, you know, mm-hmm. and to not allow myself to succumb to either, to be vulnerable to either these positive emotional states or the negative ones, because mm-hmm. neither of them are true. Like the objective reality that exists outside of the framework of our stories and narratives and our fundamentally flawed and limited concepts of ourself. So
that's how you get expectation, and then that's how you get like serious, what's the word, like disillusionment. When you believe the positive ones, it's like, well, that better happen, unless your whole worldview's screwed, and like your attachment to this thing, if it better happen the way you think it is, otherwise there's problems. And then fighting the negative one that creates this like power differential, because this terrified party was trying to get your attention, and you're like, get the fuck out of here, I don't have time for you, like you're wrong.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, but dude, seriously, like we're in trouble. And it's like, just go away, I don't have time for you. And like it's when you really get clear about it, it's kind of it's a cruel way to be treating yourself. Like to have the most scared and vulnerable parts of you that need your attention more than anything else, for them to come up and for you to just like kick them out of the way. Like to imagine doing that to a dog or to a child or anything other than yourself, it's heartbreaking when you imagine doing it to anything else. And yet we never consider that that's what we're doing to ourselves. Mm. And that's one of the biggest things.
It is pretty genuinely your inner child too, that you are, in a way, that's what you know, usually that is the voice of your inner child that you're mm-hmm. doing that. And, it's almost a counterculture thing to be radically gentle or kind to yourself. Mm-hmm. You know, kind of trained, and I think there's an assumption that if you're going to be like high achieving, especially as a man, you have to be really tough and you have to be really hard on yourself. Mm-hmm. There's this narrative, this story that the more hard you are on yourself, the more successful you're going to be. So you shouldn't be kind to yourself, you know, all this stuff. But that hasn't been my experience. I find that when I can be more gentle for myself, then that frees up a lot of energy for me to be more successful in all the areas of my life.
Totally.
You know, I'm not living in a state of contraction, you know, and I'm not tense. It's like it relaxes you, it opens you up. That expansive energy is much more attractive to positive circumstances.
100%. And like those people are my clients. Like I have clients that are like really high up in tech, and I'm specifically helping them unlearn that. Like they got to where they are by being really hard on themselves, and they have all this money and all this success, but they're fucking miserable and their relationships suck. And it's just like, well, okay, then yeah. Even if you do get there by punishing yourself and pushing yourself way too hard, it's like there's no joy to be had.
Right.
This really isn't worth it.
Yeah, I mean, that's that concept of like the fundamental disorientation that people have towards life in general. Mm-hmm. Like I'm going to get this thing. And then if I get that thing, I'll get happiness. But the way that they're going about trying to get that thing in the first place is by being miserable. And then when they get that, they're still miserable. So they're not any closer whatsoever towards their goal of being happy. And had they instead just focused on the happiness part and tried to cultivate that instead, and all all the elements of that, which is complex in its own right, but is a very distinct goal. Like, I'm going to have emotional happiness and fulfillment is a very different orientation and goal to have than I'm going to be rich and have this big company and I'll have all these things,
Yep. And like on the flip side, I have clients on the opposite side of the spectrum where they don't have a whole lot of money, but they want to get money. And they're operating from this thing like, oh, I have to do all these certain ways of being in order to get money. And it's like, well, how about you just be happy and love yourself? And then whatever you create from there will have a much better vibration. And you'll want to do it more. And so you'll stay committed and you'll do better work and all these things. So how about you just focus on being happy? And then when they do that, suddenly it's like all this money starts coming. And it's like, great. So it's like it was never about the pressure, but that's just a big cultural thing we have to unlearn. Just far too much value in productivity.
Yeah, it's totally just a cultural thing. I think that it's part of American culture and it's part of European, Western culture in general, and has a lot to do also with the family systems in which people are raised, because a lot of parents just put this tremendous amount of pressure on their kids to have to be a certain way and withhold a lot of love from them unless they do certain things. And that's really traumatizing, and that's what creates that program.
Yeah, because it's very conditional. It's like, because even school is a really good example. It's like you're only a good student if you're able to do these specific subsets of things. And then a lot of times that transfers to like you only get treated well by your parents when you do those subset of things. And you get treated poorly by your parents when you don't. You get treated poorly by the other kids and the teacher. And so it's like your essential self-worth and your access to love is largely decided by how well you do in school and then how well you do in college and all these sorts of things. And it's like, I sometimes wonder what life would be like if schools taught kids how to love themselves. Like, just what that would be like. I can't even imagine, dude.
Well, I think that there have been cultures like that. I think that Tibetan culture is one that placed an emphasis on the levels of consciousness, and that's like their indicator of social status. I mean, I think that in a way it all comes down to survival and replication. So people are trying to achieve social status so that they have the ability to mate, so they don't, so their genes don't get completely snuffed out of the human race forever. And we've created, we were born into a society that values certain things, and that other people value, and it's in congruence with those values that creates the social dynamic and allows for people to, survive and replicate. And I think that that value system is a construct, right? It's something that like we've all collectively agreed to, and we've defined, and we operate within. But the minute that we start to define other values and say, no, this is actually what's valuable, and operate on that, which is like a radical detox from the matrix that we were born into. But yeah, I think that, I don't know that much about Tibetan culture, but from some of the documentaries that I've watched about it, it seems that their whole social hierarchy is based off of how enlightened one is and how kind one is and all those principles, because they're very fundamentally Buddhist in their culture and in their nature, and they take the teachings of the Dharma incredibly seriously. So it's an example that it is possible. You could actually have a society that's built on those values.
And how do their societies actually function? Like, do you know anything about like how they live?
Well, they have basically their schools are, their monasteries are like universities, right? And people study for very, very long amounts of time throughout their life, and they study very rigorously these concepts on compassion and all the different principles of of Buddhist thought and lifestyle, right livelihood and right speech and all this stuff, and also meditation practice and how to navigate different realms of consciousness and things like that. And their systems of learning are as sophisticated as our Western university systems, only they're not teaching these sort of more practical, or more, I don't know if practical is even the word, because I think it's quite practical to have.
Totally. It's not just one consumerism.
Yeah, it's not just like learning a skill to make money. Like they're focusing on emotional intelligence and consciousness, which is amazing.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, because like our system is so fucked. It's like you get programmed with a certain set of wonky programs that you're not even aware that you're getting programmed until it's already done. And then like maybe after puberty, like 18, if you're lucky, around 18, 19, you become aware of the fact that you had some programming. Some people never become aware.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if you could have if you could just get programmed in a healthy way before age 7, like our culture would be completely different. Because it's only a small subset of people that even get to reprogram themselves. Most people learn this stuff later in life. Some of us learn it younger, and that's pretty good. Like, if you suffered enough to have to wake up early, then like, good for you. That's a damn good thing. But a lot of people never do. And that's just one of the main things in my work, is I really just want to steer us into the direction of sustainable values. Because I think that's the number one thing that we need. Like, when it comes to consumerism, when it comes to all these different things, like, we have way more power and way more control than we want to act like. We create supply and demand. Like, I just wrote today, like, the newspapers are fucked because we click on stupid articles. And like, all these billion-dollar companies that we claim are evil only are big because we keep using them. And so if we shift our values, and it's like, man, we can have such a dramatic impact. So that's what I'd like to see done over the course of the next couple generations.
Well, it is possible. I mean, you have shifts in your values. You find other people that align with similar values, and you create communities based around those values. Mm-hmm. And over time, those communities can grow, and then you have basically large countercultures that have different value systems, and it's hard to say where that can go. It's possible that a counterculture could so directly influence the mass mainstream culture that it could create a whole collective shift. And we've seen that, in a lot of different ways. I mean, our values around sex and relationships, for example, is dramatically different than it was in like the 1950s. And it's through countercultures that created those shifts, but now that's mainstream. So those things can also happen in any value system.
Mm-hmm. And like, one of the interesting, I think it's so funny, but I feel like gluten is a really good example of how quickly we can shift culture. It was like just one day, everybody decided gluten was bad. And then that spread like a motherfucker. And now, even in the middle of America, you can get like gluten-free options. And it's just like, we did that. Like, it just kind of got a mind of its own. And suddenly, like, this gluten-free thing is everywhere. Like, imagine if we did that with mental health.
Look how fast this whole, COVID-19 thing spread. And that's an example of a, it's literally a virus, but like of a meme that can spread around the world dramatically quickly. And anything could happen with anything. An idea, a realization, an orientation, an invention, a band, whatever it is. Like, these things can just spread rapidly, and they can make dramatic shifts in the timeline that we exist in. But just to pull it back a little bit, I want to acknowledge, I think that almost everybody who was brought up in the typical Western culture is traumatized by that to some degree, because it's all based on like love scarcity and needing to prove your worth. Basically, the message is you don't have inherent worth, and you need to earn your worth, which is totally fucked up and completely wrong and completely backwards. And I would like to see society built on the idea of fundamental worth and value, that like you are inherently lovable by being a human being. And, you know, and it's like just making that shift and actually living by those principles and creating a society that reflects that, it would dramatically shift things. Dramatically.
Yeah. And even because it's like the person who feels that way is going to want to contribute. Like if we were healthy, we would want to contribute. We would want to find the thing that we want to do, that we're good at, that makes the world a better place. Like people who are healthy and love themselves have a natural desire to make the world better. And so it's like we don't have to do all this stuff. If we did teach people how to have inherent worth and inherent value in themselves, then they would go out of their way to make things better. But instead we don't have that, and so they go out of their way to make things worse, and then don't really know that they're going out of their way to make things worse.
Well, that's the thing. I think everybody is trying to be happy, and everybody is chasing health, you know, and the thing is people go about it, they're really confused and they go about it really wrong. And usually the way that people are chasing that end up causing more harm, not only to themselves, but to other people as well.
Yeah. Which is the essence of shadow integration. Being able to say, like, wow, you're doing this really unhealthy, stupid thing that is making everything worse, but I bet you have good intentions. Like, what are the good intentions behind this? And how can I help you fulfill on those a little bit better? Like, once you get good at doing that with yourself, it becomes easier to do it with others. And I think that's how the values spread. And, like, I want to take this as far into the mainstream as humanly possible, because I think we do ourselves a really big disservice by keeping it in counterculture communities. Because it's like, we need to start, like, spreading this into other motherfuckers. And so I try and make it as common sense as I possibly can. So it's like, whether or not you're this, like, super conscious spiritual person who's like been around the block in all the spiritual communities or whatever, or if you're just some fucking construction worker, I think you should still be able to have access to these things. And the only difference, I think, is the construction worker speaks a different language and they have different values. And so if you can communicate those values, then you should be able to spread this stuff in a wider and wider reach.
Well, you just need to connect with the tribal leaders, you know, and the tribal leaders of Western culture are primarily like celebrities. You know, you're in LA, go talk to some celebrities, you know, about this stuff.
Actually, one of the reasons I moved here.
Yeah.
Is I plan on doing that. You know, it's like if you just get the ear of one person and they start talking about all this stuff, like, I mean, look at Jim Carrey, for instance.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there are people like Jim Carrey that have a huge reach and platform and use it as a way to influence people positively. And anybody that's at the same level as somebody like Jim Carrey has that capacity to make radical, fundamental shifts in the world through their ideas and just talking about them. You know, and unfortunately, not everybody does, but they all have the potential to. And as these kinds of ideas become more popular, and people in those positions become more receptive to it, then I think that is where you would see culture shift in a more dramatic way.
Yeah, because it's like everybody wants to fit in, and everybody wants to belong. And it's like, imagine if the thing that had you fit in and belong was like being honest about your feelings, and like being honest about your downfalls. And it was like, oh, the cool kids are so honest about their feelings. I want to be like them. Or like the cool kids are so connected to their sense of purpose, and like they're so aligned with their values. Like, imagine, like, just fuck, man. Like, I would love to see that. And so that's kind of what I consider to be my life's work, is getting it into as many different cultures and as many different communities as we possibly can. Because it's all common sense. Like, if you really break down what shadow integration is and what a lot of these things are, it makes sense. Like, it's more, like you were saying a second ago, it's more practical to do this stuff than it is to not. And if we speak to the practicality of it and how it impacts people on an individual basis, because I ran into this one was during the 2016 election, and I saw everybody like getting really upset about what was happening to the world. And I was like, wait a minute, but if you just repress all this nasty stuff, like, you're going to get a backlash and it's going to be worse. So like, we got to find a way to work with it. And people got really mad at me for saying it. Really, really, really mad at me. And I kept going and I kept going and I kept going and I kept getting more enemies and it kept getting worse. And I was like, okay, I got to figure something else out. The way I'm doing this isn't working. And so I decided to just go under the surface and not talk about politics, and not talk about culture, but instead talk about the psychological ramifications of shaming your own dark side. And then understand that if people realize that they're hurting their mental health and they're hurting their families and their relationships and their careers and their future, that they're hurting those things by repressing the dark side of themselves, then maybe they'll stop doing it, and then they'll maybe see the danger of doing it to other people. And it seemed to work. People stopped getting mad at me. People suddenly wanted me to start talking about stuff instead of like yelling at me. And so I think it's just like we have to speak to fundamental values that people, like we have to meet them halfway rather than expecting them to come to our side, because they're not going to come to our side. It's on us to learn to speak their language and to go to their side of the street and communicate in a way that speaks to their needs.
Yeah, communication in that way is a really deep skill, and it's an art form in its own right that can take many years and a lot of practice to master. But yeah, that is something worth pursuing if that is your goal and ambition, to reach large numbers of people.
Yeah, and do you know who Daryl Davis is?
I don't know.
Daryl Davis, you might have heard of him if I tell you about him a little bit. He's this black, he's a Southern musician, black dude, and he has a closet full of Klan robes that he's collected over the years.
Oh, wow.
And so he goes to these Klan meetings, he talks to these Klan members, and he hangs out with them, and he gets to know them and all these sorts of things. And as a result of getting to know him, they decide to leave the Klan. And they gave their robes to him. So he's got the robes of like the very top guy. He's got the robes of the guy below him. He's literally got a closet of 200 Klan robes from these guys that met him and were like, oh, you're not at all what they told me black people were like. And then their whole reality starts to fall apart. And it's all just because he would communicate with them and try and find common ground on fundamental values. And he'd be like, okay, you're more the same than I am. You're more the same than different. So let me find those similarities and work with those rather than focusing on the differences. And in doing that, a fucking Southern black man was able to change the minds and the lives of over 200 Klan members. And so if that's possible, then there's no reason we shouldn't be able to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think so many of the issues that we face globally are due to communication. People that just have similar but slightly different ideas, like if it's, Muslims and Christians or whatever it is, that if they could just figure out a way to be able to communicate with each other in a way that they're both mutually understood, I don't think we'd have so much war and conflict.
100%, because even going back to like the personal shadow integration side, if you've got two different parts of your personality that are in conflict and they're opposing each other, the answer is to always just have both of them have their say, figure out the fundamental concerns about both of them, meet the needs that are underlying the concern, and then the conflict goes away. It turns into harmony. And so if you observe the Hermetic law of correspondence, then if that happens inside of you, that has to happen outside of you. And so you just cultivating that sense of harmony between, like Carl Jung said, that one of the highest aims a person can achieve is the integration of opposites. And that's essentially shadow integration. And so if you can find a way to have, if you can find a way to make peace between the part of you that only cares about you and the part of you that only cares about other people, or the part of you that is excited and the part of you is afraid, if you can find commonality between those two, then shit, there's nobody you can't get along with. And there's nobody you can't impact in really tremendous ways. And that's why I think this skill it's a life-changing and it's a world-changing skill. I think everybody needs to learn.
Yeah, there's definitely apparently contradictory aspects of myself that I witness arising all the time. But I think that I try to maintain a fluidity of the concept of myself. And that would only be an issue if I was really attached to having to be a certain something or a certain way, and then my identity would feel threatened when these aspects of myself would arise that aren't congruent with that. But instead, it's kind of just entertaining to watch these different, apparently, these polarities arise within myself and just being like, wow, that's funny. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it gets even crazier when you watch them become friends. Because I started with this stuff because, I had a lot of rage issues when I was a kid, like a lot. I used to go into rage blackouts when I was a little kid because I was so mad about losing my dad. And then I hurt people that didn't deserve to be hurt, and so I put all that anger and rage away, and I told myself I'd never hurt anybody ever again. And so I started being like the quintessential good guy. He was afraid of his anger, and he was afraid of holding boundaries, and anything that could potentially cause anybody any harm, I would stay away from. And so there'd be like, oh, you actually have boundaries, and you actually have needs, and you have desires. Oh, but they might cause people discomfort. So these things seemed diametrically opposed, and there was just simply no way to do it. It was like either you're going to be somebody who hurts people, or you're going to be this miserable thing, and what the fuck do you do? And I was like, okay, underneath all of this, I don't want to hurt people, but I also want to be healthy myself. How can I be healthy in a way that doesn't unnecessarily hurt people? And then when I started asking myself those types of questions, it's like, okay, what does healthy mean? I need to set a boundary here. Cool. Can I set the boundary with kindness? Can I set the boundary with love? It's like if those are a yes, then both parts of these personalities, both these parts of myself are appeased. It's like you didn't hurt anybody unnecessarily, and you stood up for yourself. I experienced wholeness, and I experienced balance in that. And that type of integration, that type of negotiation and mediation can be done. I've never found two parts of myself or anybody else that I couldn't facilitate that kind of mediation with. It's easier and simpler than you might think. I can get most people there within 20 minutes. It's way simpler than you might think.
Wow. Yeah, we have about like 15 minutes before this live is going to cut out. If you want, we can, after these 15 minutes, if you want, we can go back on and answer some questions or something like that and talk for like another like 20 minutes. But yeah, I wanted to kind of bring it back to a little bit more of a basic level, because I've studied the shadow a bit, and I actually have a friend here, Jeremiah Abrams, that wrote this book called Embracing the Shadow, which he was a Jungian psychologist, and I've spoken with him at length about this stuff, and it's very interesting, and also read his book. So I know a bit about the shadow, but I'm curious if you could define it and elaborate it a bit to listeners that might not be as familiar with it, because I think that it often is misunderstood.
Yeah, it's very, very, very commonly misunderstood. It just refers to any part of you that you want to keep hidden from yourself. Like, that's it. If you don't want to look at it, and if you don't want the rest of the world to see it, it's in your shadow. Like, that's it. It's the direct opposition to your persona. Your persona is the forward-facing mask that you wear to say, this is who I am, this is who I want to be seen as, this is who I want you to engage with me as, and everything that doesn't fit into that goes into the shadow. And another way that I really like to conceptualize it is, because I was sitting there and I was like, why would this brilliant guy use that word? Why shadow of all things?
You mean Carl Jung when you brilliant guy? Okay.
And so I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Anything that reaches towards the light casts a shadow. And the higher you reach towards the light, the larger the shadow you cast. And I was like, oh, that's got to be at least largely what he was talking about. Like, this is what I teach in my shadow integration class, but if you create a vision for yourself that's like, I'm going to go do this with my life, you immediately cast the shadow of all the insecurities and all the reasons you might fail and all the doubts and all the things. And if you don't take responsibility for the direct opposite of what you want, then you're going to have problems. And so to me, the shadow is always like, whatever you want the world to be like, whatever you want yourself to be like, whatever you want anything to be like, there's always going to be the natural opposite. And if you don't take responsibility for that natural opposite and deal with it forthrightly, it could really come up and screw you when you least expect it.
And probably part of the healing of that is to come to a place where you don't demand things to be any kind of way, and that you are comfortable really just being with things as they are, you know, and like in that way that casts no shadow, because you're also not creating a light, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know.
Somebody asked a very good question. They said, while seeking inward is a long process, how does one self-validate instead of still seeking outward? I think that's a good question. I mean, something that I've like just noticed in my own process with this is that I've kind of created systems for myself where if I'm DJing or if I'm live painting, you know, at these events, like I've found ways that I kind of can hack the system and immediately place myself on like a slightly higher threshold socially than other people, and reap an enormous amount of validation through those endeavors. And since this situation has effectively put a halt to all events, I can't really use that magic trick anymore. So it's been a little bit more difficult to kind of, soak up that validation that I so desperately crave. So I'm curious about your answers to that question, because I can relate to that question.
Yeah, man. So I always try to make things as practical as possible. So for me, the practical application of validation is just saying it's okay for you to exist. Like, a lot of people get validation confused with approval. Like, a validation is not approval. Approval is saying, I like what you're doing. Validation is saying it's okay that you're doing it. And not that it's okay that you're doing it from a moral perspective, but it's okay that you're doing it because you're doing it. And if I were to not be okay with that, I'd be arguing with reality, and that would make me insane. And so it's just like this unwavering acceptance of what is. And when we want validation from other people, basically what we're wanting is for them to say, in your flawed state, I accept you and it's okay for you to exist. That's basically all we're looking for. And so when you can take that into yourself and realize that all self-validation is to say that me in my entirety, in my flaws and all that I am, it's okay for me to exist. That means it's okay for my shame to exist, and it's okay for my weakness to exist. And it's okay for all these things that I really wish weren't there. It's okay for them to exist. That's validation. And when you can say that, then no part of me is not allowed to exist anymore. And no part of me, if I'm allowed to exist and it's okay that I exist and I fully accept it and I even love it, then what the fuck do I need other people's validation for? It literally becomes useless. Like, it does not serve me any, there's no practical value in other people's validation. Other than, like, unless you're doing something really stupid, people can tell you about it. Like, that's really helpful. But outside of that, it doesn't really serve all that much value, in my opinion. But if you can say that it's okay for me to exist, it's okay for all these different parts of me to exist, and I'm even going to love myself in my flawed state, and like, that's all we ever need. And it's really just that simple. It's like, oh, I'm feeling this, that's okay.
I remember this meme that you posted a while ago that was particularly impactful for me, which was like, it was like, the meme was something like, you're a loser. And then you respond to that by being like, even if that's true, I still love and accept myself completely. Or something like that, which is like, yeah, that is like a radical orientation. It's like not necessarily, you're not trying to suppress the thought or the feeling. You're not trying to prove it to be incorrect in your mind by presenting evidence for the opposite or demonstrating the opposite in your actions. But it's just really coming back to that, like, fundamental place of self-love. Like, no matter what, I love you. Even if you are the biggest loser that ever existed in the whole world, even if you completely suck, like, I still love you. It's cool. Like, that, I think that is really, yeah, that's like the fundamental of self-love. And, cultivating that.
A good friend of mine, you may know his name's Decker. Anyways, he has this really cool thing that he says, and he's like, self-love is when you know that, like, you're sitting in bed, it's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly your mind plays the reel of all the most cringiest shit you've ever done in your entire life.
Oh yeah, I know that one.
Yeah. When you smile during those times, that's when you know you love yourself.
Yeah, or at least it's like, they do these compassion practices in Buddhist meditation also, which is like, basically the practice is by consciously invoking the feelings of love and compassion. You start with other people that are like really easy for you to love, like your partner or your best friend or your dog or whatever it is. And then you kind of, then you jump to yourself, and then people have different stages of their levels of being able to do that, and then you go to like somebody you kind of know, somebody you don't really know, and then you do it to an enemy, and it's called meta meditation. And I think that if you begin to practice that, where you begin to actually consciously feel love towards yourself and invoke that feeling, then you start to be less critical of yourself in those places. Like, say you have a memory that comes up that's really cringeworthy, you can just be like, oh, it's okay. Like, I can see, like, you were just, like, you were young, you were just learning, like, oh man, like, if we could hang out now, I'd really show you how it's done, kind of thing. It's like a friendly orientation.
Yeah, totally.
And I found doing those practices for many years on and off has definitely helped. We've got like a minute left. So okay. I think that if you want, for all the viewers, we'll like just hop back on another live and we can take some time to continue this conversation and wrap it up. But yeah, cool, man. Thanks. This has been great so far.
Yeah, dude. I'm excited. I'll come right back.
Okay. Welcome back.
Thanks, man. Good to be back. So what were we talking about a second ago? Oh, yeah. I was wondering.
I mean, even I think it may have been even yesterday or something. Like, I was on a walk and had some memory. I can't really remember what, but it was like something that happened when I was in high school, and the memory provoked a lot of like kind of negative feelings, and it was something at the time that I was really embarrassed about. You know, like, I forget what it was, but it was like just trying to get some girl to like me, but like horribly failing at it or something. But I was like 16, you know, and I didn't know what I was doing. And my orientation towards the memory, I think that had it been a few years ago that I would have felt that, I would have kind of just been like, oh fuck, like, you suck, like, jeez. But instead I was just like, oh man, like, I was like, you really, it was kind of like cute, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I looked at it like it was cute, like, wow, like, man, that was kind of hilarious. Like, you really just like had no idea what you were doing. And like, geez, like, you were such an idiot with that interaction. But it was like, there's a spirit of kindness to it too, you know? And I was like, it's okay, like, if I could go back to that place and tell you, like, you're not going to stay this socially inept for your whole life. I promise it's going to get better. You know, like, that would have been a nice thing. But even that, I think, is it demonstrates that there is a difference in orientation, and that these shadow work practices actually they help, you know?
Yeah.
They do help.
And they're sustainable, which is one of the things that I really had my eye on. Because like I was saying before, is like, I had to develop this framework that I used to literally save my life. Like, I thought I was going to have to kill myself. And so for me, it was like, I need things that are practical, I need things that work quickly, and I need things that are sustainable. And so it's like, I would only adopt practices that were in alignment with those criteria. And that's the thing I really like about shadow integration is, once the thing gets integrated and it's locked in place, it's just locked in place. Like, it's just there. Like one of the things I tell people is, like, you don't have to tell yourself to do all your unhealthy behaviors. They just happen. And just like when you integrate them and they become healthy, you no longer have to tell yourself to do the healthy stuff. Your mind is just programmed in a way that does it. And so it's like, that's the beauty of integration. You don't have to try anymore. Once you've reprogrammed it, you reprogram it. It just does the healthy thing. But I did want to talk about unconditional love, because something that you said, I don't remember exactly what you said, but it reminded me of this. Unconditional love is also very practical. Unconditional love makes more sense than conditional love. Because I had to learn how to love literally like this like homicidal maniac in my head. And from somebody that never wanted to hurt anybody ever again, it was like, how do you love that? What the fuck? How am I supposed to do that? I have no moral or ethical reason to love this thing. And then my needing for moral or ethical or reasons or approval, it just broke. And it was like, if you love it, it'll get healthier. And if you don't, it won't. You don't need anything else than that. Mm-hmm. And so something that I try to tell everybody, because they'll be like, oh, I want to love myself, but I can't because I don't love myself. It's like, loving yourself is a choice. And loving yourself is a choice that you do because you'll get better and you'll get healthier if you do it, and you'll just get worse if you don't. And if there really isn't a reason or a need beyond that. And then when you can come to it from unconditional love, then you can have unconditional love for everyone else. And then, like we talked about before, the world just gets better.
It's kind of like that famous Nietzsche quote, "He who has a why can bear any how," which was the inspiration for Viktor Frankl in his ability to survive being in Auschwitz. To orient himself towards serving others helped him survive the internment camps. But I think that it could be the same thing with, like, if you have a reason why you should love yourself, or a reason why you should become more healthy, and especially I think that motivation is stronger if it's oriented towards others and it's not self-motivated. Like, I want to become a better person because I want the world to be a better place. I want, the people around me to have a better experience as a result of me being healthier, things like that. Like, I think people that have families and stuff, if they're like an alcoholic, that can be a big motivator. I think that that's very helpful.
Yeah, and it matches physically too. Like, I used to study kung fu, and so my sifu, one of the very first lessons I ever took was he would get me into my stance, and he'd be like, "All right, I'm going to push you." He was way stronger than me, so he would literally just push me, and I would go fly. And he's like, "Okay, now get back into your stance, and I want you to pretend that you are the last line of defense between me hurting everyone you care about." And I was like, "Oh fuck, okay." And then he couldn't move me. So, like, he went from being able to, like, throw me to not being able to move me because I was fighting for something bigger than myself. And like, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. Like, your body becomes physically stronger. Everything about you is physically stronger when you fight for something bigger than yourself. And I think that's the most important integration, so to speak, is the integration between self and other, is knowing that when I do something for me, I am doing something for the world around me. And when I'm doing something for the world around me, I am doing something for me. And there's just this constant cycle of energy and power that's constantly feeding itself. And you just become this toroidal field that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And next thing you know, it's like you're doing shit you would have never dreamed of.
Yeah. I listened to this audiobook, Power versus Force, by this guy, Dr. David Hawkins, which you may have read. But my friend Luke Brown turned me on to it. But that's something that he talks about, is that there are certain energy attractors that have more power to them. It's like the energy that's associated with altruism and love and wanting to serve a higher purpose is a stronger energy force than selfishness. So it's just nature, just by virtue of how things work. There's more nutrition for yourself and for your actions in wanting to do something altruistically than there is wanting to do something selfishly. So you're increasing your success, the probability of your success, exponentially by aligning yourself with some kind of mission or purpose that is motivated towards something greater than yourself.
And it's really good for your mental health. Like, you brought up Nietzsche a second ago, and Nietzsche has one of my favorite ideas is the concept of the organizing idea. And that it's like, if you find the one thing, or like maybe a couple things, but generally one thing that's so inspiring to you that it naturally inspires you to organize all the different fractured parts of your psyche and all the different fractured parts of your life. This goal is so inspiring that it actually pulls them all together, and they all become part of one unified whole in service of something greater. And it's like, what higher aim is there than that? Like, I cannot think of anything to aim for that's higher than, like, something that's authentic to me, that's inspiring enough to make my whole life work. Like, I don't know.
Wow. Yeah, I think that happens all the time with people. Like, I like Tony Robbins. I'm not ashamed to say it. I like Tony Robbins. There was like one thing where he was talking about the story of this guy, and he was like an alcoholic, and he was just at rock bottom. Like, he had like severe liver poisoning, and he was just fucked up from all of his alcohol abuse. And he had these dogs, and he was like at his lowest point, and he lost all of his friends. Like, his whole life basically was crumbling. But these dogs were there, and they were looking at him like they just absolutely adored him, like no matter what. And that kind of like triggered this spark within him to feel that love and connection towards something that was outside of himself. And he was like, wow, I got to get my shit together because I have these dogs I need to take care of. Like, I can't die. Like, what would happen to them? So he started, that was the first motivation for him to sort of kick his alcoholism and start to get his life together. And then he founded, I think, like an organization that rescues dogs, you know, and that through that, now he's like completely recovered and completely healthy. But that's just one of thousands, if not millions, of stories of people that come into contact with something that gives their life purpose and meaning. And then by aligning with that purpose and meaning, then they need to take care of themselves. They need to be healthy. They need to be well in order to be able to be of service to that mission.
Which is more important historically and culturally now than ever before. Because, again, bringing up Nietzsche, like his famous quote that God is dead, it's like that God isn't like, there wasn't like a living entity that's now dead. What that essentially means is our collective belief in God is dead. Therefore, we're not born into a world that tells us what our purpose is. We're not born into a life that tells us what the meaning of life is. We're not prescribed meaning anymore. And so people generally walk through life feeling meaningless and aimless. And there's no wonder everybody's so nihilistic right now, and there's no wonder everybody's so fucking depressed and anxious right now, because they don't have any reason to live.
Yeah.
And so, like, there can almost be no more important endeavor than to find what your reason for living is, because that suddenly makes everything work better.
Yeah, absolutely. Nietzsche also like went insane. You know, like not the best example.
So did
but man, I think about that. Nietzsche must have felt like such a badass saying that. You know,
oh, for sure.
Like, he totally like went out to like the local pub and there's some like woman sitting at the bar and he's like, so you know that the whole God is dead quote? You hear anybody say that before? That was me.
Yeah, this guy.
You know, like, it's like it was like the most punk rock thing ever at the time. Like anybody.
100%. 100%. But that does kind of worry me that he went crazy, you know, because like Nietzsche went crazy, Carl Jung went crazy. Like two of the most.
Never went crazy. What do you
he did. Yeah, he started having these like crazy delusions toward the end of his life.
Maybe they're crazy delusions. Maybe he was tapping into some real shit. I mean, I've read through parts of the Red Book and stuff, and I mean that's like a hermetic tome of information. I mean, it's a fine line sometimes between crazy and sane. And for those that can't understand certain things, people might appear crazy. I think that Carl Jung, I don't think he ever went crazy. I think he had incredibly sophisticated and outlandish ideas that were incomprehensible to most people, you know, because he was his consciousness was farther evolved than others.
Yeah, well,
as far as I know, he never got to a place where like he wasn't capable of caring for himself, which I think is kind of, for me, that's one of the definitions of what crazy is like you get to a point where you're fully dependent on the care of others in a psychotic state, which I think Nietzsche, he did get to that place.
Yeah, but I think his was brought on by syphilis.
Really?
Yeah. They didn't have decent treatments for syphilis back then, so he got it, and it got into his brain, and it just drove him loony. So I think there's not much to worry about there.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know the syphilis part. Then maybe I don't remember reading that ever, but yeah.
I read it once. I don't even remember where I read it, but that's generally what people, because like when it comes to Jung, like the general consensus is, from what I read, most people seem to think he went crazy. I like your version of it better. I haven't actually read the Red Book, but I want to. And so I'm wondering if I'll agree with you as a result of doing that.
The Red Book is like a work of visionary art. It's like the same it's on the level of William Blake or any of the great visionary mystic artists, poets. You know, it's amazing and deeply symbolic, and is almost entirely realized through his visions that he had in dreams. You know, yeah, Carl Jung was amazing. I know very little of him and his work. You know, I've read probably a decent amount of it, but still it's like barely scratching the surface of what he was coming up with.
Yeah, same. I actually kind of like, I had been doing shadow work for years before I ever even heard Carl Jung's name and took it seriously. I only started looking into him because I'd been doing shadow work for so long that I was like, oh shit, like this is the guy that came up with that phrase, and he's the one that like outlined all this stuff. So I started studying him as a result of that. And yeah, man, it's just absolutely mind blowing. But I haven't read the red book, and I really want to. They're a typed version. Oh.
Well, the original version was handwritten in German, and yeah, there is if you buy the book, you can buy only the text, or you can buy the large version that also comes with his artwork and illustrations, and it's typed and translated into English. But just to kind of get back to sort of a more direct approach to this conversation about shadow work. So yeah, Carl Jung initially coined the term the shadow. How do you think his definition of the shadow differs from the ways that most people might see it or interpret it? Because I find that people generally orient towards the shadow in it's like things that are kind of spooky or kind of scary. But I don't think that that's really what he was saying.
Yeah, so, I don't think so either. Me and my girlfriend actually laugh about this. Like if you search the shadow work hashtag on Instagram, it has absolutely nothing to do with shadow work whatsoever. It's almost like all like darker, like edgy aesthetic witchcraft stuff, which like sometimes witchcraft coincides with shadow work, but most of the time it doesn't. And so I think that's one of the biggest things is people attribute it with like darkness and like more animalistic things, which is like for the most part, a lot of people do carry that stuff in their shadow. But a lot of people in the West, like their love is in the shadow and their compassion is in the shadow. Empathy is in the shadow, which Carl Jung called the golden shadow. But it's like for everybody that doesn't know what their purpose in life is and isn't actively living it, or people who aren't creative, it's like that's because that stuff's in your shadow. It's not because you don't have it. It's not because you're just not a creative person. There's no such thing as a not creative person. Like you create things all the time. You can't help it. But it's possible for the part of you that enjoys being creative and feels comfortable being creative and is okay with messing up, which is part of the creative process. It's possible for all those things to be in your shadow because you're uncomfortable with them. And that's possibly one of the most important things. Because like this quote that like everything you have is already inside of you, it's cliche at this point, but that goes along with shadow integration. Like if there's something that you can't do, but you really want to, you have an intrinsic drive, but you can't seem to get yourself to do it, it's because the part of you that would just effortlessly do it is buried. So you got to figure out what's burying it, like what's on top of it, and why did I bury it, and what's this thing, what's purpose is it serving? And once you get it out of the way, then suddenly you can do the thing that you meant to do. And so shadow to me just means hidden. And I think it's extremely important to talk about that. And I'm glad you brought it up because like darkness just doesn't cut it. A lot of people have kindness in there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, when I was a teenager and I was really into black metal and I was wearing, leather jackets with patches of bands that, stabbed their singer in the forehead with a knife and then burnt churches, that was a protection mechanism for me because I was inherently sensitive and kind and empathetic, and that left me vulnerable. So I had to put on a persona of being more intimidating or standoffish so that my sensitivity wasn't rocked by people's lack of kindness around me. So in that case, for sure, my kindness was at that time in my shadow. At that time I was trying to identify with being kind of mean, but I wasn't actually. It was just a way of protecting myself.
Yeah, we have it in common actually. I was very much a mean kid when I was in high school. But it was just a protection because as you see, I'm a big fucking softie. But somebody said something. Yeah, the shadow blurs things you don't want to confront. So I think it's extremely important. The shadow doesn't do anything. The shadow only does what you tell it. So the shadow doesn't blur things, you blur things because you don't want to see it. And when you really own that the shadow is just it's part of you and it only behaves in the way that you tell it to, then to me that gives access to a whole hell of a lot of power. Because it's not like, oh, my shadow is blurring this thing for me. It's like, I'm blurring this thing. what reason would I have to obscure my own internal reality from myself? And there's always answers to that.
Wow. Yeah, I wanted to ask you something, which is I found that a lot of the people that I've had in my life might have shadow aspects that they're not integrating, and there's also a tremendous amount of resistance to having aspects of themselves reflected at them. You know, for people, like a lot of people just don't want to hear it when you can point out even gently what their flaws are or the ways that they're hurting themselves and other people. You know, and I think that definitely an aspect of doing this work is being able to be honest with yourself, to really look at yourself and the ways that you're not healthy or the ways that you could change to be different or better. But I'm just kind of curious what you think about that. I know it's not really, I think it's not really wise to try to impose on somebody that's not ready to hear it. But yeah,
which is interesting because it's like, I find the only reason people would ever want to impose to someone for someone else to change is because they're actually uncomfortable with the way that other person is acting. And so the work just comes back to you anyway. It's like their job isn't to make you comfortable. Your job is to figure out whatever's making you uncomfortable and deal with it.
Yeah.
And then once you come into like harmony with whatever is bothering you about that person, they cease to bother you. And in fact, because you understand it in yourself, you now have compassion for them. You now have understanding for why they're doing what they're doing. And then when you have compassion and understanding, then that actually puts you into a position to have a conversation with them that might actually lead to insight. But when you're attempting to change them because what you're really trying to do is change the way you feel, it's a zero-sum game. Nobody wins. So I get my side of the street, and then as a result, I'm able to deal with you in a much more clear way that actually, you know, you might be more willing to listen to what I have to say, which I harp on all the fucking time.
Yeah, I kind of thought that that's what you would say about that.
But
yeah, it's true. It's really true for sure. I was also wondering.
Go ahead.
Go for it, man.
I was just going to say, it's where you put responsibility.
Yeah, it's an internal boundary thing, and I think that that's like also the cure for codependency is to realize that my responsibility is to my own inner experience. And whatever goes on outside, I have no responsibility over that. Like I can only control my reactions to circumstances. I can't actually control the circumstances themselves. And Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who's a really powerful Buddhist teacher, has this metaphor about that where he's like, it's like the world is covered in shards of glass and you're walking barefoot on it and it hurts. And so in order to solve this problem, you get a ton of leather and you just decide to coat the entire world with leather so that it doesn't hurt your feet. And that's the orientation towards like, well, this person annoys me, so I'm gonna change them, and I don't like this, so I'm gonna change that, and like all these external changes. Whereas the opposite is to wear shoes, which is basically to improve your own inner state so that you're not as buffered around by all the external disturbances.
100%. Yeah. And so Vanessa says, like, what if you're annoyed because the person is acting in a way that's outside of your values? And even then, it's like, well, who says that your values are the values that everyone else should be living by? You know, like, why would somebody doing something you disagree with bother you? You know, but if their values affect you, that's different. Like, there's a difference between observing somebody who's acting in a way that you wouldn't act, and so you're like judging them and making yourself suffer, even, and they don't even know that you're suffering, and somehow you think you're impacting them. There's that, but then there's like somebody who's actually doing something to you and having an impact on you. Then that's a boundaries thing. That's not a projection thing. That's a boundaries thing. And so, like, how skillfully and compassionately you go about setting that boundary is one thing, but that isn't necessarily, it's healthy to share different viewpoints, but there is a distinction to be made between, like, I just don't like the way that you do things versus, like, the way that you're doing things actually harms me, and I need to put a stop to that.
I mean, a lot of the major conflicts in the world are based on these conflicts of ideologies and people being righteous about their values and their views and beliefs. So I think that doing away with that as much as possible in our own personal lives, you know, like I get kind of triggered sometimes because like I eat vegan, but I'm not one of those people that tries to tell the whole world that you should eat vegan. And I do have some that are like that though, you know, that like won't even eat at a restaurant that serves meat, or will be like judgmental to a friend if they order like a meat dish. Like, it's not me at all, but like I definitely have been around those people, and like they trigger the hell out of me, because it's like you're trying to fight like a fight with violence, whereas it's like the only way to really resolve anything is through love and understanding and peace, which is what somebody like Gandhi exemplifies.
Yeah, which is why it's like, if you really look at some of the most successful activists in the history of activism, they were peaceful. Like Gandhi, for instance. Like, to think that you could get the English Empire to back off of you just by being a little guy in a diaper that smiles when people hit you. And to think that like not fighting back is enough to where people will be like, holy fuck, I'm doing the wrong thing, I should stop. And like it had the biggest empire in the world leave India. Like, that should not be ignored, man. That it's far too powerful for that.
It's also because he was aligning with high energy attractors, and his opponent was aligned with lower energy attractors. And if you're aligned with higher energy attractors, those higher energy attractors always win. Yeah,
which is, you know, a hermetic law. And so this is what I try to tell the activists now. It's like, guys, like, you cannot be activists who only speak for the betterment of other activists. Like, you're creating an echo chamber, and you have no idea. A lot of people don't have any idea how off-putting their messaging is to the people that they want to change. Like, it's great for the people that are in the in-group, and it's like, we already agree, yay, good for us, let's pat ourselves on the back, we're fucking great. But to all the other people that you actually need to reach, and you actually need to impact, and whose lives you need to change, you sound like crazy people. And like, we all need to really take responsibility for that. And we can't be like calling people sheep, and we can't be like being mean to other people because they think differently than us. It's like, the people that we want to impact and the people that we want to change are the ones that we have the greatest responsibility to be kind to. Because it's on the responsibility of the activist to do whatever's required to create change. It's not the responsibility of the people we're trying to change. That's absurd. If it was on them, they wouldn't need activists. That's completely absurd. It's our responsibility to figure out what will connect to them and what will actually change their minds and create the world that we want to live in. Because if we could win through bullying, and if we could win through shaming, is that creating the world that we actually want to live in? Or is that just creating more of the same shit? I don't think we want more of the same shit. I don't think we're all working this hard to recreate the exact same shit. I don't think that's what we're here for.
Amen, bro. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I give a clap emoji to that for sure.
That's the message right now, man. That's the biggest thing I think people need to hear, especially now. It's like,
yeah, for sure, I agree.
Yeah, people keep getting more and more heated, and it's just, the conflict's going to keep growing until either we collectively snap in a psychotic break, or we start to come together. It's one of the two. And I don't want to go through a collective psychotic episode. That is not something.
So do you want to take some questions? I think that's a pretty awesome place to end this conversation. Sure. We can open it up to see if any of our viewers have any questions for you and for both of us.
Yeah. Anybody have any?
Let's see if there were any earlier on.
Thoughts on the collective shadow. Oh my God, yeah, Jesus Christ, I have a lot of thoughts about that. Oh man. It says thoughts on the collective shadow versus COVID-19.
Oh yeah, you go first.
Yeah, so shit, okay. So the number one thing that comes to mind is, like, you've got conspiracy theory people on one side, and then you've got like more medically minded people on the other side. And they seem to have absolutely no interest in listening to each other. They seem to be completely convinced of how right they are, this worldview versus this worldview, and all this sort of stuff. It would work out. And the interesting thing that I always find when it comes to any kind of collective issue like this is that the truth is somewhere in the middle. And the more polarized we get on any side of the spectrum, we become completely incapable of creating a holistic worldview. It's like, yes, there's a lot of horrible things the U.S. government has done. And I'm just going to talk about America because that's where I live. And it's like, I could name off all these things that have been proven and declassified. And it's like, yes, we have a horrible history of doing terrible things to our own fucking people. So yes, this is very, very realistic. And I have some friends who were epidemiologists and all that sort of stuff. And it's like, okay, everything they're saying is also true. So it's like, yeah, there could be massive abuses in power. And at the same time, we really need to be careful about the actual medical reality of the situation. And like lockdowns and all these sort of things actually kind of make sense from a perspective. But on the other side of it is like historically governments abuse power when these sorts of things have been happening. So it's like, okay, cool. Like knowing that both of these things are in place, we need to come up with a plan that addresses both. But because these things are so polarizing, and all we can do is make fun of everybody who doesn't agree with us and call the conspiracy theorists just crazy people, and then you call all the people that want to stay on lockdown sheep. It's like, how the fuck are you supposed to collaborate? How are you supposed to find the whole picture? And how are you supposed to create something that can move us all forward when you're like huddling with your side of the story, you won't listen to the other? Like we're intellectually crippled from that perspective. We just can't do anything. So that's when it comes time to look at the emotional underpinning of like, why am I being so defensive? Why am I being so one-sided about this thing? Why am I not listening to other people? Why am I writing everybody off? I must be protecting some kind of emotional experience. What's the thing I don't want to feel? And can I feel it? And through feeling that, can I have a little bit more access to understand what people might be trying to tell me? And I always find the answer is yes. The more I integrate the emotions that come up when people say things that freak me out or make me angry, when I integrate those emotions, I'm suddenly able to communicate with those people and understand what they were really trying to say and then find a way to work with them rather than against them. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that when you're coming from a place of contraction or fear, you can't find resolution no matter what. So I think the first step is just for people to kind of sit with their anxieties, sit with their fears and resolve that and integrate that within themselves. And then they can contribute constructively to the conversation to be able to find resolution, to get clear about what's actually happening. But yeah, definitely what I've observed is people just really contracting into fear and that not allowing people to be constructive in this situation. And something I just wanted to say about that with the collective shadow as it relates to COVID-19 is, have you ever heard of Carl Jung's theories on UFOs?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so he basically is saying, I mean, his ideas about like manifestation and causation are really metaphysical, and they're a little bit outside of the way people might view things. It's a little bit magical in his thinking, but I agree with them. And he was saying that UFOs are kind of like a manifestation of the collective psyche based on a desire for contact with the other or divinity or whatever you want to call it, that it like satiates our inherent need and drive to be engaged with the mystery. And that's where UFOs come from. I think UFOs are objectively real, and now there's, you know, evidence that supports that. And I actually saw something last night that like could have, I mean, it's as close to a UFO as I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's like thing talking about.
I posted it on my story.
Yeah, it's funny.
But anyway, yeah, it's the thing with COVID-19 is sort of similar. Is like there's so much mythology collectively around apocalypse. You know, there's so much around that. Maybe the situation, I'm not saying that it's not real, because I think it is. I think there is genuinely virus, just like I think there are genuinely UFOs, that it manifested because of this collective fixation on the apocalypse narrative, you know? And there's a lot of investment in that. Like a lot of religious organizations are invested in apocalypse narrative because in order for the return to happen, in order for the Messiah to return, in order for Jesus to come back, whatever it is based on their particular religious beliefs, the apocalypse and all of these huge dramatic tragedies are necessary for that to happen. And they're very invested in that thing happening so that they can get their Messiah to return, or so they can get to heaven, or whatever it is, so they can be liberated. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think that just in my own personal life, I've found that certain beliefs that I hold directly result the way things manifest. And so I think that happens on a collective scale as well, where if we all participate within a particular idea, if we give food to a narrative, that narrative is more likely to actually come about.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. That's really interesting. I don't even have anything to say about that. That's kind of like, I'm going to have to like chew on that for a little bit. I hadn't considered that. But it's like,
Chew on it.
yeah, because that's, I'm kind of like knocked off guard by that. But it's like, didn't the Egyptians also allegedly have contact with UFOs? Did they have like apocalyptic stuff?
I don't know about Egyptians, but the book Supernatural by Graham Hancock is really great because it historically shows that there have been contacts with supernatural or extraterrestrial forces for as long as humans have had the ability to record history. And you even see it in old cave paintings and stuff like that. And they've called it by many names. They've called it alien spirits, fairies, in shamanic cultures, they have different names for it. You know, there's like a million different words you could use to label it, but the idea of there being some kind of other equivocal level of consciousness, a being with an equivocal level of consciousness that is non-human, that resides somewhere outside of this terrestrial realm is a common idea that has existed for as long as humans have been around.
Well, I definitely like the idea. You know, I like the idea of us talking to these sorts of people, and I just hope they're cool. You know,
yeah.
Like
yeah,
it
either serves a purpose to exist as an archetype within the collective mind as a species that doesn't really have a particular historical basis, like something that is just part of human nature forever, or it's possible that humans have actually had contact with beings, you know, and I'm open to both.
I just really like that idea. I really want that to be the case. You know?
I know. I really like it too. I really want that to be also.
I don't know if that has any bearing on anything, but I do like it. But
people have messaged me and they're like, it's a weather balloon, it's a kite. I'm like, man, I want it to be aliens. It's aliens. You know,
and there's a lot of cool stuff, man. There's like a lot of reasons to think. Like, to me, it's more absurd to think that they don't exist than it is to say that they do. Like, a limitless universe, like really, really only ones, that's a little silly.
It's not only silly, but it's like, it's kind of depressing. You know, like it's a really dark reality to actually consider that that's the case.
Yeah, and also
it's hard for me to you know, I have to do a lot of shadow integration around that concept if that's the truth.
Yeah, man, I just don't think so, man. I don't think so. And it's like, if it's just too many questions. I actually don't really think about aliens all that much now that I think about it, but I probably should. It's like
There's another question. There's another question that was a good one. Let me find it. It was a little bit
Blue.
Oh yeah, would one attain the desired level of consciousness by the information acquired in practicing, or seeking a mentor or guru? And what I have to say about that is that I definitely have had experiences throughout my whole life of receiving a transmission from a teacher, and I believe that that is a true, real thing. Whether that's creatively through certain artists that I've spent time with and been around, or even through more spiritual things like meditation practice. I've been very fortunate to meet some people that are the you know, the leaders of their tribe in their field. You know, some of the best painters in the world, some of the best tattoo artists, some of the most acclaimed meditators, things like that. And I definitely feel like by speaking with those people, I have received certain sort of transmissions or have downloaded knowledge or information from them that wasn't verbally communicated. So I do believe that that is a possible thing. I've never had a guru. Like, I don't think I've ever really met anybody that is a truly enlightened being. I've met some pretty enlightened people, but I don't think I've ever met somebody who's like an avatar. But there's a lot of stories about people who have come into contact with these beings and have received transmissions, and that it's dramatically accelerated the growth and development of their consciousness. So yeah. I think that
you just read Ram Dass's books.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Ram Dass is who I think about as an example.
Yeah, and plus, I mean, I'm honestly a little jealous of some of the people you've gotten to hang out with. Like, you keep a pretty dope circle. Like, that's really cool. I see some of the people you've had these conversations with, and I'm like, dude, that guy's got some cool people in his corner. But
you know, bro, like when you're cool, you attract other cool people. I don't know.
That's why it's so hard for me to stop working for Android. Like, I really did not want to stop working for Android. I got to meet so many cool people because of that, and it's like
when you were working for Android.
Yeah, that's how I met you. It's how I met Luke. It's how I met so many people. But it was a massive distraction.
A lot of people in his circle too, for sure.
Yeah, man. Mother Mary was oh Jesus God, my girlfriend's talking all kinds of nonsense. So I've never had a guru. That's my girlfriend, by the way. She talks about ridiculous stuff. Was it good? Was it God? So I've never had a guru, but I have had teachers. I've taken Kung Fu. My Kung Fu teacher was a very, very, very big influence on me. Extremely big influence on me. Yes, even that I didn't mean really. I've also had, like, my friend Decker, I consider him a mentor. To me, it's just like, I don't take advice from people who don't have what I want. And so I look for people who are living the way that I'd like to live, and I just hang out with them. And I get to know them, and I see if I can contribute to their lives in any way that I possibly can. And as a result, my life just gets better.
That's a big thing, man. I think if you want to get around people who inspire you, one of the best things you can do is be of service. You know, like I've volunteered for workshops. You know, I've helped Android out a few times, helping him with his workshops and like set everything up and like clean it up afterwards and stuff like that. And yeah, that's a great way if you want to get around somebody who inspires you, that has something that you want to learn, is volunteer. Like, see if you can serve their mission somehow.
Yeah, that's literally how I got to work with Android. I did not know the guy. I had absolutely no interest in art whatsoever. I wasn't even a fan of his when I started working for him. I was just at Burning Man, guarding the gallery during the night of the burn, and the person who was supposed to replace me never showed up, and so I stayed and worked for an extra, like, 3 to 4 hours, and I was happy. And he was, just because I worked extra and was happy, suddenly I got to work with one of the most prolific artists in the world for 5 years straight, and got to meet people like you, and got to travel and have all kinds of cool experiences and meet all kinds of really cool people, just because I made somebody's life easier without asking for anything in return. And that keeps happening. Like this other, my friend Decker that I just talked about, he's like on par with Tony Robbins, but less known because he keeps his name underground.
What's his name? Decker what?
Decker Kunov. He does, he does a lot of corporate stuff. So you wouldn't, if you Googled him, you probably wouldn't get much out of Googling him. He's kind of like in the background, like under the surface and all sort of stuff. But he's one of my really good friends, and I became friends with him and got to work with him because I worked the door at a Burning Man fundraiser at the house he was living in, and I did a really good job working the door. And so he comes downstairs and he's like, "Whoa, dude, everybody's really happy when they walk through the door. What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm just having fun." And then I hit him up 2 days later and I was like, "Yo, that was cool. We should work together." And the next thing I know, he invites me to this 9-month training, and then he gets me into this thing, and I'm sitting in board meetings for tech companies, and then suddenly I do business consultation that I didn't go to school for and have no qualifications for, but because I was nice to one guy at the right time, I got this really cool opportunity that I was in no way qualified for. So like, yeah, there's a lot of mentors out there. I don't know about guru. I wouldn't trust that. I wouldn't trust anybody who self-identifies as that.
You definitely should trust anybody who calls himself a guru. And all of the stories of genuine gurus that I've ever heard, including Ram Dass talk about his guru, is they really don't identify with being a guru, and they really try to escape all the trappings of what being a guru is like. Like, supposedly, Neem Karoli Baba, who is Ram Dass's guru, would be in a certain place, like at somebody's house, and then people in the town would hear about him, and they would all kind of like swarm in on him and like try to like sit with him and hang out with him, and he would like escape. He'd like go out the window and like disappear. So you know, that's the kind of guru you should find, somebody that doesn't want to be a guru. Yeah, Kumari's that's a fun documentary. That's a cool story. I have another friend here that lives in Bali, and he was Hug Baba. Basically, he was doing the Kumari experiment before Kumari was a thing, where he was in Goa, and he is an Indian guy, and he decided that he was going to be a guru as an experiment. So he wore pink robes, and he hugged people. He was like Amma kind of. And his only rule was he would hug anybody, and he wouldn't pull away if people hug him. So like they had to pull away first. And he said that sometimes there'd be people who would like hug him for like 20, 30 minutes and like cry. And, you know, he would go into a restaurant and people would be like, it's Hug Baba. And people would like queue up to hug him.
Dude, placebo's a hell of a drug.
Placebo is so real. And I think that most of the transformation that we ascribe to external sources is because we agree that some kind of external thing is going to change us in a certain way. But it's actually us in our own internal process that creates that change and shift. But yeah, that Kumari documentary is interesting because people's lives were changed by him as a quote-unquote guru, but he was just a guy.
That's so cool, man. That's so cool. I mean, it's like a really interesting spell to be casting on people. It's a good one. Thank God for that. It's a pleasant one. But it's just so interesting that you can do that. That all you have to do is convince people of a thing, and it simply becomes reality by virtue of them believing. And their lives change. Like, could you imagine?
Teachers do, man. I think that's what all good teachers do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is they're able to get somebody to see that they can be different and to invest in that and to believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really that person through their beliefs and through their investment that realizes that change. It's just like a small external reinforcement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is interesting, especially being in the position I'm at, where I'm a coach, and so it's like I'm not a guru, but it's like you're kind of in a situation where you're influencing people to believe in themselves. You're creating containers for people to invest in believing in themselves, and an idea that I resented and railed against for a long time, that the actual physical investment of money was like a transformational element of the thing. But I'm actually starting to accept that as reality.
I think it's true. I think that's a true thing. I agree.
I think for sure. I thought it was marketing tactics and manipulation for a long time, until I started doing it. And I was like, no, that works for everybody. When people pay me, I'm more attentive. When I pay other people, it matters more to me. And so it's like, yeah, okay, no, that does matter. And in and of itself is an interesting kind of like ritualistic kind of spell casting. It's like sacrifice. Like back in the day, biblical times, you would give up your most valuable animal, you know, for God to like keep blessing you. And this is kind of the same thing. It's like you take something of a large value and you give it up so that you can become this new version of yourself. And so it's basically the same thing. It's just like ritual sacrifice, but instead of animals, we use money. Yeah, energy exchange is another one.
Yeah, we have money now as a symbol that represents life force energy. Mm-hmm. So it's the sacrifice of the life force energy.
Yeah. And it's like you give up the thing that you're, and like your level of attachment to the thing that you're giving up is directly related to the transformation that is capable through giving it up. Like if you're not attached to the thing and you give it up, then it's like, who cares? You didn't lose anything. But if the thing
Right.
really mattered to you when you give it up, then it's like, okay, this is going to be really powerful.
Right. And for people that have a lot of money, maybe like money is something that doesn't even really have that much meaning to them. And they'd be much more invested if they sacrifice their time and their energy into something, you know? So it's different for different people. But yeah, I understand what you're saying with this principle of needing to sacrifice something in order to become more heavily invested in it. And through that investment, that enables you to go farther in your endeavors.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be money, but that's definitely one of them. Because I have clients that like pay me a lot, but they can't seem to like get enough time to talk to me on the phone. So it's like interesting where their priorities are.
Right.
Value shows up differently for everybody. But I saw somebody ask something about integrating resentment that I figured we could.
Oh yeah, hit it.
So resentment's just covering up pain, in my opinion. We resent somebody probably because they hurt us, and probably because the pain hasn't been processed fully, that the resentment is there. That's my read on the situation. Like, if you weren't still hurting, you wouldn't still be resentful, is generally how it goes, in my opinion. So you may have to actually do some processing of the resentment and talk about how much you hate the person and how much you wish they were different and all that sort of stuff. But in order to get that out, then you get to the pearl underneath, so to speak, and that pearl probably made up of pain. And if you can nurture the pain underneath of the resentment, then the resentment goes away.
Yeah, I totally feel that. Yeah, I found in my own experiences that, yeah, usually resentment or aggression is like a shell that encloses these much more vulnerable emotional states. And when I can kind of break through that and allow myself just feel my vulnerability, because that's all it is, really. I think it's trying to protect our vulnerability, you know, try to keep us safe, because it's scary that we are vulnerable, you know.
Yeah. It's like the mama bear.
Yeah, when you can feel that, when you can feel safe to open and really feel that, then that anger, that aggression, it transmutes into something else. It helps open your heart. The closing of your heart is like a protection mechanism.
And you can, like, you go from unconsciously protecting to consciously protecting. Like, protecting with a closed heart to protecting with an open heart. Like, hey, like, you're kind of acting like a douche right now. I don't want to be around you. I'm going to take some space, but I just want you to know that I love you. And if you ever want to talk about whatever's having you act this way, I'm here for you. But until you decide to do that, I'm taking space. Like, you're still protecting yourself. You're still doing whatever you got to do, but you don't close your heart. And you don't have to do it unconsciously.
So I'm curious what somebody asked if you have any book recommendations. Do you have any book recommendations?
Do I have any book recommendations? Read the Kybalion. The book of Hermetic Philosophy. Read that. Honestly, read comic books. Like, I really think comic books do not get enough credit for the stories that they tell and the archetypes that they allow you to learn about. I legitimately think comic books are very widely underrated. But the Kybalion is my favorite right now. Stranger in a Strange Land, I think everybody should read. It's my favorite book of fiction. Possibly one of the best books I've ever read, ever. Obviously all of Ram Dass's books, but specifically Paths to God and Be Here Now. And then Embracing Ourselves by Hal and Sidra Stone. Those are the books that have probably had the biggest impact on me in my life.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just about shadow alchemization as a subject, this book, Embracing the Shadow, that my friend Jeremiah Abrams compiled, is incredibly comprehensive. It's perhaps like the most comprehensive book written about the shadow.
Wow.
And yeah, I mentioned it before. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl is actually a very beautiful demonstration of how our inner state reflects our external circumstances and the importance of our inner state over that. And we mentioned Dharma punks earlier too. That's kind of a fun one.
Yep. But honestly,
Wave the Peaceful Warrior, that's a good one too.
Yeah, Peaceful Warrior is a good one. But one of the biggest things that like I'm a little bit ashamed to admit is I don't read a lot. I haven't read a lot. But the reason, the counterbalance to why I'm not actually all that ashamed of that is because there's not much you can't learn just from observing your own mind.
Yeah.
In my experience, just observing your own mind and getting to know all the different parts of yourself and learning about who they are and how to work with them rather than against them, it's like that has literally uncovered the same secrets of the universe that like the Buddhist masters talk about. Like I have a direct felt relationship with my oneness with everything, and like my inherent nature, my inherent connection with nature and the universe and all that stuff through intellectual exercise.
Mm-hmm. Like, well, it's integration, right? Integration is the important thing, because you can read a lot, but unless you actually are integrating what you've read into your life's experience and personalize that information into a way that actually has relevance, then you're not getting anything out of that. You can just sit around and read forever, but you got to actually go out and like have life experiences and find out where that information connects to what you're experiencing.
Yep. And I actually have had some clients that run into that issue where it's like, oh, I've read this and this and this and this, and it's like, well, but it's not helping. Well, what are you doing with it? Like, oh, well, nothing. It's like, well, that might be the reason. Maybe you should be doing something with this stuff. But I also want to recommend people listen to punk rock. Punk rock is better than therapy 9 times out of 10. And it does not get enough credit.
Yeah.
The philosophy, all that sort of shit, it's just so good.
Yeah, for sure. I never was that super into punk rock, but yeah, I appreciate its aesthetics. Do you have any closing remarks? Any
just this is really fun.
Passionate
Adna, we've talked for an hour and a half. This is good, man. I'm just really honored that you thought of me. I'm really happy to be here. This is a really good conversation. Everybody that joined on was so like communicative, and this really felt like an awesome conversation with us and a bunch of people. This is just really fulfilling. I'm really glad everybody was here. Prepare yourself to speak. Oh, which bands? Top 3? That's a good question. As far as for the context that we're talking about here, a band called the RX Bandits. Probably Pennywise, and maybe Anti-Flag. Those bands, in my opinion, cover philosophy, politics, and existentialism in a way that has really made me a much more solid person.
Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks, man. This was a really great conversation. I got a lot out of it. And thanks to everybody that tuned in. Tool, for sure.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Tool's not punk rock, but they're very, I mean, like, 46 and 2 is the theme song of Shadow Work. Right?
Yeah, it actually is. Like, it actually is.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks, Chris. Enjoy the rest of your night. And I'm going to be recording and posting this conversation, and you can share it on your channels later if you want.
Oh, yeah. Great, man. This is awesome. Thank you so much for thinking of me, dude.
Yeah, my pleasure. Much love. See you soon.
Take care.
Yep. So we did it, guys. That was another episode of the Quarantine Sessions podcast. I am the host. My name is Jake Cobrin. I want to thank you again for tuning in and listening to this episode, and I hope that this was a valuable experience for you. If you're interested, you can watch these podcasts live on Instagram. I am doing between 3 and 4 live podcasts per week. And if you want to find that, my Instagram account is _.cobrin._, just for aesthetic embellishment. And please subscribe to this podcast so that you can be notified of further episodes. And that's about it. Many blessings to you wherever you might be. I love you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Be well.